And
All right. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I'd like to just first introduce a couple of us. So my name is Daniel Turlisi. I'm the Research Innovation and Plant Protection Lead here at Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers, if you haven't met me before. I've been responsible for doing a lot of the coordination with the new Canadian Organic Standards. I have a seat on the technical committee, CGSB technical committee, and providing some feedback on the new standards. So we've been working closely with Ontario Organics and some of the certifying bodies just to give you a better idea of what new standards are being put in place. And we have two of the most renowned certifying bodies, I guess, here in Canada, or some of the most used certifying bodies. We have Simon and Byron. Simon, you're from Ecocert, and Byron is from Pro-Cert. And before we start those presentations, essentially for, I guess, a bit of an agenda, I am recording the meeting. So if there's anyone here or anyone that wasn't able to make it here, you can send them the video afterwards. I'm going to be sending out the recording afterwards, and we can. No, go ahead. And we have a special guest speaker here.
Not at all. Not special, just local.
We have Mr. of Agriculture Trevor Jones here to happen to be in the neighborhood, so
That's great.
good timing. And if you want to say any words, and we have a lot of organic members here.
I'm a fan. Obviously, organic growers and conventional growers taught me a lot of what I know. So I'm conversational, thanks to you, your growers, colleagues, people in, the business of promoting organics, verifying organics, and moving that whole conversation forward. So, lifelong resident of Leamington, born and raised here. So born on a farm, left our farm like most farming families do. Worked for many, many years in public service and policing. Left policing to move to fresh food production, my passion. Loved it, started advocating for it, and I learned a lot about organics and how tricky it is, how demanding it is, the yield pressures, the business marketing pressures, the regulatory pressures, and how the differences between Europe, US, and Canada are. That's probably a consternation to your group. But thank you for what you're doing. I'm so happy to be the local MPP and the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. And I'm happy to take some questions if anyone has an idea, or if you want me to take something back to my colleagues. Most of what I do as an MPP and Minister is educate.
And Minister, we do have some people online, just so.
Yeah, so you can imagine 50 years ago, the legislature looked a lot different. Half of those 124 seats were probably farmers, farming families, or very closely removed from farming. Now, 124 seats, probably 12 or 13 of us really have a deep connection to food production, to farming, to food marketing. So most of what I do is education. So anything you do, if you want to leave me behind something, I'll leave Richard with my contact information for my team in Toronto and Guelph and Leamington. We're always happy to have conversations open. I'm at your service. Thanks for being here today at the OGVG. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. But Richard will share my numbers generously with everybody. If you think of something, if you have a colleague that has a question for me, please let me know. Of course.
so
We broke in together. We'll do the building together.
we did, and I should have had this conversation with you in the parking lot. So Dr. Erica Shelley from Ontario Organics. So I represent all of these people and all of organics across Ontario. And next week there's a roundtable about the agricultural policy framework, and we've not been invited to the table. And we really think it's very important that organics be part of these conversations. And I've reached out to your office, but if you can please bring organics into this discussion, we would be very thankful.
I'll do my very best. So tonight I'm driving back to Toronto. We have meetings all day tomorrow. I'll tell you, I know because of what you and your colleagues have told me, we're giving away hundreds of millions of dollars and buying organics, which are verified under different regimes elsewhere. You can grow that internally, grow that organically, right here in Ontario. And that's not lost on me. So I'm a big fan and a champion. So Thank you very much, but I'll leave my all my contact information. I might even have something here. I think I do. So I'm gonna leave this with you. This is a friend of mine, and this is me. So share that with the team. That's our portal to my Toronto office, right, your service. So have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, and thanks for joining.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you all. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to stick around if you'd like, but somebody else will brief you on.
I'm already late.
Yeah.
I'm over a month
No, no,
ago.
no.
These are the people that inform me and inspire me to make me good as both an MVP and a minister. So thank you.
Grab an Ontario Organic bag. It's got some made
course
good
I will.
products in there
So you wanna know
and some
something?
goodies,
Take a
yeah.
picture. So as minister,
Oh,
As
take a
minister,
picture? Can we get
it's
that?
a serious privilege to be able to travel the world and promote Ontario and everything. We were at the biggest food summit in the world, which is in Dubai, 100,000 participants, like 6,000 vendors. And when I saw, the first thing I saw was this, in stores, the store visits. I'm a great secret shopper. And I asked them why made good? They're like, because low glycemic index, allergen-free options, made good, made healthy ingredients. They have a very discerning buyer and purchaser. And what the conference taught me was that complementary packaging to the product inside. So like Trevor, or Your Excellency, they call me, which is crazy, my staff will tease me, like Trevor, you want to complement the product with the packaging. We don't want a clunky plastic clamshell per se, with beautiful organic produce in it. You have a very discerning customer that's looking for complementary. So think fiber, think paper, think fiberboard, all these different things, these biodegradable or these, I guess it's starch-based, biodegradable plastics. All these things, start thinking that way. So again, your colleagues around the world are informing us, we brought that back, and it makes perfect sense to develop these types of things, but these products are great, we love these, yeah. Made in Ontario.
If I can get you to pull up the little swag.
First I will, well, come on over here, everybody,
Good.
come on over here.
Where the fire's here, and then we.
Because the cans are beautiful,
Great.
thank you.
And is there a way to send those going?
Absolutely. I'll make sure the annual gets.
Yeah.
You have a card, please drop an email to our office,
Okay.
have a great rest of the day. I'll let you know. Thank you. I'll take my coffee. Thanks, you guys. Have a good day. Appreciate the snacks.
And so that was a bit of an impromptu visit. Mr. Jones is in the area today, so we figured that we'd give a bit of a spiel at the beginning. And with that said, we have Erica Shelley. She's already done a bit of an introduction for herself, but if you want to
Yeah.
continue.
Let's go ahead and I want to thank everyone here today, as well as those that are joining online, for attending today's presentation. So, if you're not familiar with Ontario Organic, you may have known us previously as the Organic Council of Ontario, or OCO, and we have been around for a very long time, about 16 years, and we are a not-for-profit voice for everybody in the organic value chain. And so I'm just going to have you advance to the next slide there, if you don't mind. I think it's the computer. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's because there's a thing there on, I think, at the top. Some sort of, so there we go. Oh, see if you hit it. There we go. Okay. Should work. All right. So one of the things that we always do before our presentations is to make sure we acknowledge the land that we are coming from. So for those of you that are online, we're coming from across Ontario and across Canada. And so we want to recognize that the farms, the land, and the food systems we work within are part of the traditional territories of many Indigenous people. And if you have a land acknowledgement that you'd like to drop in the chat, or even just let us know where you're coming from. For those of you online, we'd love to know where you're coming from today. And today, for those of you that are here, we are in Leamington. And our land acknowledgement here is recognizing the region's deep Indigenous roots. We would like to recognize that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, and specifically acknowledge the Caldwell First Nation and their historical ties to the area. So just to the next slide there, if you don't mind. Thanks. So our group, as I mentioned, we are a not-for-profit and we're here for you. So we're not part of the government. We're here to provide education, organic tools, advocacy, and anything to actually promote organics here in Ontario. And it's very, very important that that we're here to help you. And I think over the last several months, Daniel and the OGVG have connected with us. So this has actually been the first time we've had like lots of talks back and forth between our organizations, and it's really great to have a better understanding of what the organic greenhouse sector looks like. So the next slide, if you don't mind. We just want to talk about in general what's happening in organics right now. And we do recognize there's a lot of market volatility associated with rising gas prices as well as export reliance, and a lot of those things are changing and transitioning, and it is an issue for our farmers. We also recognize in terms of our market that consumer trust and transparency expectations are needing to be improved. And so marketing is one of those things that we really want to focus on with all of our organic brands, and evolving standards. So we're going to be talking about that today, but that is a concern for people, those updates from that have just been released, and our supply chain gaps between farm and post-harvest. We find in organics that finding organic processing sometimes can be difficult. Meeting minimum order quantities, obviously not a problem probably for the greenhouse industry where you guys are working, but some of our smaller farms also, our processors struggle with those things. And then also just, increasing that interest in local and organic. And that's part of what we're doing today. So if you don't mind, thank you. So at Ontario Organic, we have three strategic pillars. So building that consumer demand, we say this is an equation. And the equation is who's eating the food, who's making the food, who's processing the food. And if any part of that equation is not going up, then we have problems in organics. So we're really trying to work on that equation. Data leadership. So there is a lot of missing data in terms of organics. And so we've made great strides just in the last year and a half in terms of accessing some of those pieces of data, but we have a long way to go. And so there is a working data group, a national working data group that is working at accessing more data. And that's a part of our strategic focus here at Ontario Organic, but as well as part of the overall national focus of organics. And of course, member engagement. All of you here today, if you are certified organic, you are one of my members. But we also have paid memberships, and that's where we'd love to see you, because that's really what keeps the lights on at Ontario Organic, is people investing in the work that we're doing for the industry. Our next slide there. Perfect. If you haven't been online on our ontarioorganic.ca website, go there. You're going to find there's a lot of great stuff there. But just in the last couple of months, we released the first national organic data portal, and you can actually find pretty much everyone who is certified organic. You're going to be able to filter them by their products and their locations and even their certifying bodies. And there's a couple of gaps that we still have to fill in there, but for the most part, there's a lot of that information. There's other information about imports and exports, commodity pricing, and we're building that out slowly. And also there's the National Organic Data Survey that you can see some visualizations with. So if you don't mind, the next slide there. The National Organic Data Survey, you'll see there's a QR code there. If you want to take a little shot of that, we'll be sharing that as well. Basically, we are collecting as much information as we can about the organic sector so that we can really have a clearer picture of what organics looks like across Canada and across the entire value chain. So I know there's a lot of people here in regulatory affairs, so please fill that out. We want to hear your story and what's happening with that. But wherever you fall in that organic value chain, we want to listen and learn and also get information so we understand what organics looks like across Canada. And then our next one. We also, for our leadership, so we're talking our brands, our universities, anyone who wants to be leaders in organics, we want them to help shape the future and what that would look like. We want everyone to, but particularly those people that would like to invest. And so there's a QR code there for a survey so we can understand how we can best collaborate and partnership to build organics in Ontario. And the next slide there. And we also want to acknowledge that organic doesn't stop at the harvest. So a lot of people hear about organic farmers, but there's so many important players in organics. And so we do have a post-harvest organic sector meetup, what we call FOSS, here in Ontario. And basically we're trying to close that gap between farm and market. And we do have some people right here in the room that joins us for those conversations. And we're finding that there's a lot of collaboration and connections being made through those sector meetups. And then the next one. And so some of the things that have come out from that is about certification navigation support, introducing buyers, sector mapping, shared knowledge resources, and event and networking integration. So those are all some of the things that are coming out of that, and even more. There's just a lot that we've been learning from that. And finally, as I mentioned, please visit ontarioorganic.ca. You will find lots of resources there. And we've got Get All the Dirt, we continue to dig. And we're continuing to add to this and create resources with the idea of making organic easy. We know organic farming never will be easy, but actually getting resources and tools and information should be the easy part in the whole story of organics. And finally, just to say, if you want to come out and visit us on farms, we have our Feed on Farms tour. So our next tour is actually at Nature Fresh Farms. And so that'll be happening on June 27th at 10 a.m. It's a 2-hour tour. Isaac, are you leading that?
I will be, yes.
All right, and learn all about greenhouses there. We also have a HasCat brunch happening at Paradise Fields, a winery tour at Southbrook, and then a wagon tour at Finnings Farm. So a lot of events happening this upcoming summer. And finally, actually I have 2 more. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. I just actually skipped that one. And I mentioned there's lots of ways to support us. So if you are maybe hearing about Ontario Organic for the first time, or if you've known about us for a long time but have not invested in organics across all of Ontario, there's lots of ways to support us. So you can come on with membership, sponsorship. We have webinar series. We have events that people can come together with. We also have funding for program partners. If you have an idea or there's something that we're doing that you would like to help fund, we would love to invite you to that opportunity. And then we have our Ontario Organic Champions, and some of these people are donating a set percentage of their sales, organic sales, every year straight back into Ontario Organic. And I think that's it. So yeah, so thanks so much. We're really happy to facilitate this meeting happening today and bring together the OGVG, all the greenhouses, the certifiers, and everyone online. I imagine we have quite the array of people that were able to bring this discussion and answer those questions that I keep getting emails and phone calls about all the time. So happy to now just hand it over to you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Erica Shelley. So yeah, I guess the main purpose of this is, one, to introduce Ontario Organics, but also what most of you are probably looking for is having the certifying bodies talk directly to you all about the recent changes to the Canadian Organic Standards, or the recently published Canadian Organic Standards. I know they are quite extensive, so looking through what's changed and Yeah, just to instead of looking through yourself, and trying to explore what's changed, it can be quite daunting. So we have, like I said, two of the main certifying bodies here, to explain exactly what has changed specifically for greenhouse producers. And after their presentation, we'll have plenty of time to ask questions, to have some open dialogue about, what specifically on your farm you should be looking for, and maybe some key recommendations from the certifying bodies, certain things that they're looking for your next upcoming audit. So please utilize this time after their presentation to ask plenty of questions, open discussion. For everyone online as well, once the presentation is done, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions directly. We have a speaker here, so we should be able to hear you. So without further ado, we have Simon and Byron from the certification bodies to present. All right.
Is that recording?
Are we recording? Yeah,
I still scan through this recording.
yeah, we can record this one. Good to go.
All right, hello, I'm Simon. I am the technical expert with Ecocert Canada, and I'm also the representative. I represent Ontario on the technical committee of the organic standard. So yeah, I would like to present my personal summary of the points of change in the standard that I think will be of interest to greenhouse growers. I know there's a lot. I know you're not all happy with the changes, but I think we can work through them. So.
Maybe I should just introduce
Yeah.
myself
Oh, sorry.
before we start. I'm Byron Hamm with Pro-Cert Organic Systems. I'm the program manager and assistant manager for our certification body. We're based out of Saskatoon with offices here in Lindsay, Cambria area right now. We work Canada-wide, so I'm also an organic grower focused on dryland grain farming, but I understand the field of the production side of things as well. Been involved in this since 1990. So Simon and I both kind of put together similar presentations today. So we've decided to kind of combine them. We're going to use Simon's format. I'll make mine available online as well through Daniel. But this just goes to show that the thinking and the commonality here is very similar, because when we looked at it, we're doing the same thing in terms of exactly what we decided to present to you. So we're going to split it up a little bit today. We'll do a little bit back and forth and see how it goes from there.
That showed up and realized we had independently created two nearly identical presentations. So we're just going to use this one. So yeah, the background, the Canadian Organic Standard, I think, is unique in the world in that it is not controlled by the government. The Canadian Organic Standard is written by a technical committee that's elected by all these producer organizations across the country, following the guidelines of the Canadian General Standard, now defunct Canadian General Standards Board. So the CGSB had rules about how these technical committees need to be made up. They need to have representation from all sectors of the industry affected by the standard. They need to have representation from each geographical part of the country that's covered by the standard. And the Canadian government, the CFIA, has one vote of the, 40, 50 votes or whatever on that standard. Every other country, the government makes the final decisions. In the US, they have a similar and much better funded technical committee. They make recommendations to the USDA, and the USDA usually follows their recommendations, but sometimes they say, no, we're just not going to do it. They don't have to give a reason. They make their own rules. So the downside of that is, since we control it, we've got to pay for it. Whereas the other countries, when the government, if they're going to pay for it, they want the control. So that's the state we're in now. And yeah, not only do they not pay for it, but they've just shut down the agency that controls our standard, the Canadian General Standards Board. And we're now in a kind of a limbo period as to how the next version of the standard will come about. We just heard yesterday it might even be 7 years now before we do another revision of the standard. But that's another story. So this current review request, again, it's very democratic. Anyone who wants to propose a change to the standard can submit their proposal. They all get looked at and they all get treated by the working groups. We had over 250 proposals that were submitted. Every single one of them got reviewed. And if they were rejected, the committee that rejected it had to give a reason. All the rejected proposals can be viewed. So after that 2-year process, sorry, yeah.
I was gonna say, before we leave that, within the technical committee, who is the voting committee, there's also the working groups, which Simon mentioned. And that is where any of you can get involved as technical experts in terms of your field of expertise. And that's where volunteers are always needed. So it really opens your eyes up to the larger picture sometimes of why some things that you thought would be an easy win in the standards when you saw a draft or a proposal or put your proposal in, to see the discussion behind the scenes of why these things are and how they have cascading effects throughout the standards sometimes or throughout international trade. So when this does come up in the next 5 to 7 years, for the next review period and volunteers are called for, I'd encourage each and every one of you to really consider this, because it really strengthens your insight into the process, and it allows you to have a voice directly in influencing what that standard becomes.
Yeah. Yeah, in the last version, almost everyone that was involved in this process was a volunteer. Some of them, like technically I was a volunteer, but Ecocert generously paid my time that I spent working on it. So I guess I wasn't really a volunteer, but the industry pays for it in that sense. And anyone can submit their name to be on the technical committee itself, but the nitty-gritty work of hashing out all these proposals is done at the next level down, the working group level. And there's no limit on how many people, technically, there's no actual limit on how many people can be a part of each working group. It's divided into categories. So there's a greenhouse working group, there's a poultry working group, a permitted substances list working group, and anyone can join. And if you're willing to volunteer, they'll take them. So, yeah. So in terms of what actually changed, I'm gonna sort of start from the beginning. And again, I may have missed something. This is just me going through the changes and looking at the ones that I think the greenhouse sector might be most affected by. So starting with the definitions, there's a revised definition of what it means to be derived from biological or mineral sources, because that was ambiguous. And some people could argue that, for instance, all fertilizers are derived from a mineral source in some sense. And so that's clarifies now what that means. So that could have a minor effect as to what products are allowed to be used in organic production. The definition of formulant has been clarified, also have an effect particularly on pest control, but also on fertilizers. So the big one, the definition of hydroponic was changed. The old definition was a simple one sentence: cultivation of plants in aqueous solutions without the aid of soil. And that definition had carried over from earlier definitions in the standard. Then in the 2021, there was this introduction of soil volumes, or the expansion of the requirement for minimum soil volumes. And commenters, I guess, or people in the industry saw that even when it would be technically possible to develop a production system that had soil that was still effectively hydroponic, that in which the soil, no matter how much of it there is, could be still inert and everything supplied through the irrigation system, and that they were arguing was still a hydroponic system in the intent of the word. And so they modified the definition. But the definition isn't, again, the definition only really serves to, to give an intent, I guess, to give an intent. There's nothing in the definition, I think, that could be used as the basis of a certification decision, because it's more general. The nitty-gritty technical details come further down in the standard. But
if I can add something, so these are the grower principles or the grower practices standard.
Yeah.
So these principles don't really apply to the growers themselves, mostly for the Canadian, US equivalency rate. So this is where we'll see the biggest change is imported and exported produce using this definition.
So, right, yeah, I'm not sure that it will have that effect, but yeah, part of the intent of changing that, because we already have a restriction on Canada-US equivalency, where the Canadian industry has said, we don't think the USDA has been strict enough on the issue of hydroponics, and we think a lot of the stuff being produced in the US is hydroponic, and we don't allow that. That gives a competitive advantage to US growers, so we're not going to allow in American produce that has been hydroponically produced. And they think that this new definition will then prompt the American certifiers to withhold Canada equivalency from US product that has been produced hydroponically. I'm not sure that they will use the Canadian definition when they make that determination, but at least Canada has signaled its intent to the US certifiers as to what we expect you to consider when making that. So equivalency was definitely a big, and that was partly done to protect the Canadian industry from unfair competition from the US.
This could be used as a tool in making determinations on some systems. It wouldn't necessarily be where your non-compliance would come from, but when we get into systems that may border the lines of hydroponic or soil-based systems, this is where we'd be coming for this definition. So in looking at systems, if you think that you might be in that situation, that might be close, because here they went away from just being in an aqueous solution. They talk about the growth media having things like carbon-based materials such as coir, or even may contain soil. So the focus now with this definition is about where the plants draw their nutrients from. Is it supplied primarily through soluble supplied nutrients, or are they drawing something from that growth medium as well? Or is it primarily coming from that growth medium? And so this is where this definition may hold an important place in looking at some operations. So if you get into that situation with your certifier, this is likely where they're going to go to try and make a determination of where that line is. And it is broad because it says mainly draw their nutrients. That's open to definition. So that's open to you demonstrating. If you believe you're on the right side of that and your certifier does not, that's where you can use that to define where you mainly draw your nutrients from, right? Doesn't say it have to be 51% or 60% or 75, just mainly. So there's room for interpretation there.
I'll start and then I'll pass this over. Do you have anyone doing strawberries in greenhouse? Maybe online there are people doing strawberries. So there was a change to the strawberry, the definition of perennial seedlings. That has been an issue that's been inconsistently addressed by different certifiers. And it arises from the inavailability of certified organic strawberry propagation material. So now they've clarified that, like all other transplants, if you're buying a transplant in a pot and then you're going to plant it on your organic farm, you can't do that for annual seedlings, and for perennial ones, you can only do that if the harvest from that plant won't be organic until it's been managed for a year. So this is to prevent, let's say you buy a little lettuce in a pot that's not organic and you plant it on your farm, and 10 days later you harvest it as an organic lettuce. That's what they're trying to avoid. They've set the bar at a year now, but they've granted an exemption because there's already a whole industry built around using non-organic strawberry transplants. So now they've got a phase-in period until 2030 in which they can use non-certified organic strawberry plants, and only strawberry plants. Everything else, 1 year of management, or if it's an annual, it has to be a certified organic transplant. And again, that only applies to potted transplants. Seeds, cuttings are a different story. Do you want to get into that?
I was just going to say, in this, it's really about those plants that would produce fruit in that first season, the perennials that will produce harvestable fruit in that first season. So if you're going to harvest that product, just like an annual in that same season, that's when you have to have the organic seedling in the perennial, and you can't use the non-organic. But again, you have, we're in I guess a 4-year season now, or for 3.5-year countdown. I guess we're already into the planting, 3.5-year countdown to when you have to have this mandatory. So it gives the industry time to adjust. But you have to think about that if you're into those perennials that are producing product in the first season and how you market that, if it's going to retail or otherwise. You can market that as organic or not. Okay, I think that covers a good part of seed. In terms of the other one I wanted to touch on that might affect greenhouses here, again, is actually supplemental lighting in 5.3.7. We don't have it on the slide, but 5.3.7 does add an interesting new clarification that would directly affect you on the greenhouse side. If you're producing the seedlings for your own use on the farm, at that point, seedlings can be produced under 100% artificial light until the point they are transplanted into their productive end space, whether it be a container or an in-ground soil system, whichever system you're in. Prior to that transplant, you can be under 100% artificial light, so like a growth chamber type situation or otherwise, so long as it's used on the farm. If you're doing both, producing seedlings for yourself and selling others, then you have to differentiate between the two. But for on-farm use, this is a new provision that they've made an allowance for as well. So just something that may affect some of the operators here in that case. Next slide, where's the 5.4.4? This is one that everybody's looking at right now. Here, this is adding some limits to where the water soluble nitrogen and phosphorus is coming from, up to a maximum of 20% of the crop's needs. So essentially what we're doing, what's happening here in the standard as a whole, that's going to hit the greenhouse industry a lot more so in certain areas, is it's putting a focus on natural systems for soil building. And it's moving it away from reliance on permitted substances. So as producers, you already probably have well-established data internally for your nutrient programs, et cetera, on the demand of your individual crops in your production systems, in your soils, in your environment, okay? So having that data available to back up this calculation means that we can rely on some of your historic data year over year to say, yes, this wasn't just the 1 year, the peak we can use as much as possible, but historically, this is what we are doing consistently for tomatoes or peppers or whatever. This is our nutrient demand in our system. And we can use that data then to start calculating what the 20% amount is that is allowable through the soluble supplemental and what has to come from the insoluble from that soil system. Okay. It's really about connecting us back to the essence of what organic was, which was products produced in the soil as part of a living ecosystem. And Simon's going to talk about this a little bit later on. He's going to touch about where that all came from, the history of that as well. But in this case, it's going to be a little bit more math. I think a lot of you are already doing nutrient calculations on the farms already. It will need a little bit more time in looking at specific inputs and deciding what's considered soluble and what's considered insoluble. I think we'll touch on that a little bit as well later on.
Yeah.
Next up is what's in that list, next one here. Okay. In terms of greenhouses, one of the clauses we want to touch on is 7.5.3, which really just says that when we're looking at the standard as a whole, the other sections applicable in terms of crop rotation, soil building, etc., for the most part, with minor exclusions, are also applicable in a greenhouse type situation. So things like crop rotation obviously are not really applicable to a greenhouse situation. The requirements around mechanical cultivation practices are also not really applicable. But when we get to things in terms of how we manage soil, how we manage pests, some of those things that are common to any crop or any type of production system, those still apply also to you in the greenhouse sector. The next board here. This one is where we're passing it back to you. Okay. We'll pass it back to Simon to talk a little bit more on soil.
Okay, so a new one that are.
Yeah, if you can just use the marker.
Oh, that's. There, your left-handed mouth.
There we go.
So yeah, the big change, one of the big changes, 7551, the soil used in a container system shall support and promote microorganism and macroorganism populations that contribute, like a living soil in the field, to nourishing the plant via its roots. If necessary, the soil can be inoculated with non-genetically engineered microorganisms of this, and yeah, that with not, you can inoculate the soil with organisms. The soil shall. Not, that's, the rest of it is from the old standard, hasn't changed. Obviously, no prohibited substances. Everything in there shall be listed in table 4.2. The mineral fraction, the 2% mineral and 10% compost hasn't changed. But the part E has been to provide more clarity on biological fraction that supports root soil interaction and supports soil health. So, yeah, this captures the intent of the standard writers that even in a greenhouse, the soil should be the primary source of nutrition for plants. And it should be a living system, not just microorganisms, but like macroorganisms should be in the soil, earthworms or bugs or, and yeah.
So in looking at this, one of the questions that I think Erica, myself, Simon, probably Daniel too, and all of you have had as well is how much of this do I have to use? What is the biological fraction?
Yeah.
And we want to point out something that's key here is if you look, that the standard is very specific and prescriptive in many areas. You've seen it already. Right in this section, it talks about 2% of the soil mix having to be of a soil or mineral fraction, 10% has to be compost. There is no percentage, there is no measurement attached to the biological fraction, which means that there is openness to interpretation to a broad range of approaches. Here's where we're taking a very open-minded approach to this. And I think in terms of introducing it, it's a great way to see the standards do this, is it's not tying it to a very limited perspective. So if we can try and go, if we want to find specifics and say exactly how much, because I'm worried about the cost or otherwise, that can be pushed and we can look at things through the standards interpretation committee, et cetera. But we run the risk of actually putting ourselves in a very prescriptive situation that will further limit us down the lines in terms of innovation, in terms of meeting this requirement or meeting the requirements of future crops that we're trying to displace from an export perspective or otherwise. So what the certifiers are looking at here is what type of activities are you doing? Are you making a reasonable effort to meet that requirement of this fraction supports root and soil interaction. This fraction supports soil health. If you can demonstrate that to us, we have a very, very open mind in terms of what's compliant here. Okay, so I know this one's been a bit of consternation for many. It doesn't give us something to measure. It doesn't give us a target to meet as a measurable percentage, but it does give you room to operate as well.
Yeah, and I think when the standard has become more prescriptive, it has been in response to what the technical committee has seen going on. I think when it gets prescriptive and the response is to just, like as an example, okay, the mineral, 2% mineral. If the intent of having 2% is a very low number, but the intent of that is that the mineral fraction of the soil contributes to plant nutrition. But I've seen applications where like, okay, 2%, this is the minimum, I'm gonna put exactly 2%, no more. And what's the cheapest mineral that I can get away with? Like basalt, is that a mineral? Yes, all right, I'll put basalt. Like, no, the only consideration was how do I meet this prescriptive requirement. And when that starts happening, that's when I think the technical committee pushes back and says, okay, we need to get tighter with these prescriptions. But I think if it's where the standard is embraced, and we see, and it's not just greenhouses, we've seen that with like poultry is a big one, where like outdoor access, it used to just say you have to provide outdoor access. And they would push the limit, like, okay, I'll open my door for 1 hour in June and July, and none of the chickens ever go out or whatever. And so the result was the technical committee pushed back and made it more prescriptive. So I would encourage, the industry to, you know, uh, go for the intent rather than the prescription.
Well, think about the one thing that's really helped me through my years as an inspector as well has been thinking about what is that standard there for? Organics isn't about what you don't do. That's a very small portion at the very beginning. I think it's in section 1 or section 3. It says we don't use non-GMO, non-irradiated, non-sewage sludge. If that was the standard, we'd be done in a page and everybody be happy and out of here. What the standard is about what we do on our farms. It's a whole production system, and that's why it's this substantial 60 some odd page or 70 some odd page document. It's all those systems of what we have to have in place to mimic a natural system. We can't ever reproduce what nature has done at its best, but we can actually try to mimic it as close as we can through using natural systems and taking away the synthetic, taking away the man-made, and using these systems that way. So that's what it's really about. If you approach the standard from that perspective of trying to meet that goal, the larger goal, and that includes this in terms of the soil root health, the soil root interaction. Target the goal, not the minimum requirement. What are we trying to accomplish here? That mineral fraction. If I put base salt in, what's it going to do for me? It's going to keep things cheap. Is it going to add anything to my soil? No. What if I put something else in? Can I get actually better response in terms of making my soil, as we get into some of the soil retention issues later on? Is this going to help me? Maybe your mineral fraction is 5 or 10 or 15%. That's great. That's encouraged. 2% is not where you end. It's where you start. So think of it that way.
Yeah. And it's not because this is a better system, let's say. Like, organic has never been a nutrition claim. I mean, the CFI even made us put in like a disclaimer, like, no, organic food is not more nutritious, or it's like any good marketing pitch. It's a story. The organic is selling a story about how food is produced. And I'll go into this later. The central character in that story for the last 100 years has been the soil. And so this is a story and a whole, the promoters would call it a movement that's based on the soil. And I don't think there's any point in sort of trying to, maybe there's a point. I mean, we can try, we are the industry, we can try and encourage the standard to move in a certain direction. But this is a value proposition that has been developed over 100 years, and it's about intangible things. I would say. Yes, yeah.
Simon, I'm just noticing we have in the chat here, Antonio says that 7.5.5.1E should start with a word like contain, include, or provide.
Yeah, it seems like a small,
Yeah, every once in a while, you have to remember that they started this process in 2023. They had 250 recommendations. There was literally thousands upon thousands of hours of time from the committees put together. This goes back and forth between the committees to then make a recommendation to a technical committee for a vote, for feedback, revision. And then when it's all said and done and finally approved by the technical committee and says, we want to publish this, then it comes to the government, it comes to CGSB, it gets translated. And then it goes to the lawyers to make sure the translation is really good. And every once in a while, in all of these steps over the 2.5 years that this took, actually almost 3 years it took, there's the odd little word whisker there. And that's probably one of them. And I'm certain that already the Organic Federation of Canada has already tracked this. I know there's a couple of little areas that they've identified that the wording wasn't quite as clear by the time it got through voting, revision, translation, and legal, that came back and said, yeah, we're gonna have to tweak that next time. That's one of those. Whether it says contain or otherwise, it says it shall, it says a biological function. We can look at that and we can understand that that's exactly what the intent is there. And I don't think that any certifier would kind of entertain too much argument that that's not what the intent of that section is.
Right. Okay. So Section 7.5.12 in the greenhouse section just says it again, soil building and health are the cornerstones of organic agriculture. And hence, clause 5.4 regarding soil fertility and nutrient management of this standard applies to crops grown in this section. So it applies to greenhouse crops, except that 5.4.5 does not apply to container function. So that's about the allowance for regenerate for throwing out your soil at least after 3 years or maybe sooner, depending on the situation. So in ground off. So if you are growing in a heated greenhouse where the plants are actually growing in the soil, those are much more common in Europe, then the soil shall be regenerated the same way they would if they were in the field. And then there's additional requirements in 7.5.5. If you are using containers, you shall build permanent soils in your containers, reusing the soil for a minimum of 3 years. This is the next big point of contention. For a minimum of 3 consecutive years. If necessary and with justification, the soil may be replaced prior to 3 years. Spent soil shall be recycled in or outside the operation unless the disposal of used soil is mandatory due to a regulatory directive. Container operators have 36 months from the date of publication of the standard to comply with this requirement. And the requirement is only reuse the soils for 3 years, but that requirement still has an out. There's with justification, you can replace it prior to 3 years. And even the requirement, even do it without justification, you still have 36 months to meet that requirement. So there's a lot of leeway before this is immediately being enforced. Yeah.
What would you consider justification?
Well,
That's the immediate question.
Yeah.
And there could be situations like soil-borne disease or otherwise that might be justification. Again, this is one of those areas where they didn't go terribly prescriptive because they want to, this was a new requirement, so they want to allow some wiggle room for interpretation on this. I would say too, thinking about certification from a year after, consider justification if you have a problem and you have to, because that's soil. Background, the preventative action too. How are we going to keep this from happening again? Closing of our soil every year. Thousands of years old.
Soil. I would strongly suggest to every grower in a container system.
Just gonna get you to pause, our online audience can't hear right now.
Oh,
Yeah, we had some audio issues with the owl there, but I hooked it up to my laptop here, so
okay.
I should be
You wanna
back.
Come over here then?
Yeah, should be back now. Yeah.
All right.
Are we, where did we leave off?
What was the last thing I
Yeah.
heard?
Probably at the beginning of you discussing that, so you probably, if you can go back a little bit.
Okay, I always say it better the first time through.
Well,
Uh,
we're recording, so at least that.
We're recording. I'll go back to this, as we're looking at this from a 36-month point of view, first and foremost. Let's start here. Doesn't mean that you have 3 years to not worry about this and then start 3 years from now. I would encourage each and everyone who's in a container growing system to start some trials right now, to set aside space in the greenhouse or in a growth chamber somewhere to start building some trials of what would a sustained soil over 3 years look like, and use these 3 years to measure different options, different variables, not just one solution, to see what will work for you by the time you get there. When we get there, like I said, we talked a little bit about justification. That's where we were going beforehand. And the justification can be things like soil-borne disease, or other things to this effect. Is very broad because it allows us room to operate here. It allows us room to interpret for a wide range of circumstances that may affect your operation. But what we will be looking for is that justification doesn't come from the same grower year over year over year for the same problem. So think not only about why you're asking for justification this year, but what was the cause of that? What if it was a soil-borne disease or something? Is there something else I can do to prevent me needing to ask for this next year? So think of it in the long-term solution. That's going to, and again, going back in history, because I've been in this for far too long, since like 1992. The one thing I have learned is when you take a look at this, not only from the current year's perspective in this year's crop, but look at the long view for your system, for your production system. If you want to sustain organic production, take that long view, not just fix the problem now, but how can I avoid the problem in the future? Those are the growers that I met in 1992 that are still here today. The ones who looked at how can I do the bare minimum of what I have to do to meet this requirement, and the one who's going to use the base salt is the only requirement because it's the cheapest, easiest thing. Those guys I see come and go in 3 to 5 years historically on average. And probably the same with Simon. We love to have you while you're there, but we'd love to have you much longer as well, because we really see the value in this system. So think of it long term as well when you approach these problems. Are we hooting?
Yeah, yeah, we had to do a quick restart, but should be
Okay.
should be back running now.
Yeah, should we do the job? Okay, to yours.
Yeah, so
Good question here.
Oh, yeah, please.
So, I've been working in the organic, sector of the greenhouse industry for almost 14 years.
Yeah.
And what we've been looking for the entire time is how to get more lifespan out of our, our free mixes and our cocos and our bags.
Right.
So it's, if anything, we're trying to find ways to make it last longer. What's making it difficult is when brown rugose came into the area, and everyone's blaming, it's, I touch Gary, he's got carrier now, I'm touching Spence carrier now.
Yeah.
A lot of the, if you take a look at some of the most experienced consultants in the area, a lot of their feedback is the very first thing we say, cut out the plant, get rid of the bag.
Right.
Stop it from spreading. So in scenarios like that, my question is, scenarios like that, if one of the preventative measures you can take is to get rid of the soil right then and there to prevent spread, how do we control that and justify that to the certified bodies? And then also when it comes to, now canker's back in here and things like that, that's another disease where the first thing anyone will tell you is get rid of the bag, clean up the debris on the ground around it, yada, yada, yada. So I guess
throughout the whole greenhouse or just in a particular area
it's
that's.
the first plants you find, get rid of it.
Yeah.
As it moves, there's like a threshold there.
Yeah.
If there's 6 to 7% you start losing something like that, it's too late. Then before you know it, it's throughout the entire greenhouse, so. Yeah, I guess we're trying to already for years, it was canker, now it's rugose. The very first thing everyone talks about is how easily transferred it is. Right, so I guess what I would say is, how do we justify it? Do we, is it as easy as, hey, we have a positive rugose test, here you go?
Yeah.
We have a positive canker test, here we go, in the soil, in the debris, and all that, is that all that you would be looking for?
I think if I was going to take a first approach at this, first of all, generally, we're not going on a pot by pot, like it's pot 423, still 3 years old. We're looking at your system as a whole. So individual, if we're talking about individual bags and individual plants being removed early on to prevent disease spread, that's sanitation, that's also provided for in the standard. And that's, I think, something that most certifiers, again, if you have some record of this, that you're doing this and that you're taking aggressive control of this, that's fine. Where we would be more concerned is when we see whole greenhouses wiped out. And because for two things have happened, that means that the disease has gotten out of control, or the problem has gotten out of control, and it has the potential to spread other ways. And I look at the other thing, and I know it's not necessarily the easiest one to do, especially in a greenhouse type situation, is the biosecurity, of course, as you said, from side to side. I spent some years, probably 10 years back in BC doing inspections in the poultry industry when they had the avian flu influenza. And what was really interesting is that because the organic guys were kind of worried at the start, saying, our birds go outside. A lot of the flocks that were getting destroyed were inside flocks, no outdoor access, but they're still having problems with avian influenza. There was a thought when that hit that the organic industry was going to be wiped out because they were outside birds. There was one flock of all the BC organic flocks that got hit. And what they actually found was the spread of the avian influenza was not so much about the wild spread, but it was about biosecurity between farms, between shared workers, between people running from farm to farm, between shared equipment, brother borrows uncle's tractor, cleans out the barn, whatever else, draws it onto the farm. So biosecurity, and I'm assuming in your facilities too, and a lot of the ones, at least the ones I've seen as well, biosecurity is important, and it will remain so. The other way to limit that, which isn't always practical, and in a lot of cases, and most of your cases probably isn't, is about scaling by size and isolating production units so that if you do have a loss situation, you're not losing the entire crop, you're losing one small component of it. In the case of the poultry growers, it was one barn instead of all the barns, or it might be a section of the barn, right? Because it was isolated off completely. So just looking at the scale of production and how you organize, and it's usually that comes down to new construction and so forth to say, we're gonna define smaller growing areas across the same square footage. That can give you the opportunity to isolate things a little bit more, but it's more costly. So infrastructure wise, it's not the best solution, but it's one of the solutions. That's why you see limits on things like flock size, so forth, and poultry and animals too. It's about limiting loss. Some of those same principles apply, not necessarily easily though. Okay. But yeah, going back to your question there, nobody's gonna fault you on a bag by bag basis, but we will be asking some harder questions if you have to redo the entire greenhouse this year because of it. And probably still pretty open because you have the data showing the disease.
Right.
You come back next year and you have 2 more greenhouses now, not just one, but 2 more that have to get pulled. We're seeing this as an accelerating problem, not one that's becoming under control. That's where the harder questions will get asked.
Kind of build on that, so. I think from a legal perspective, you can probably read this 75 different ways.
Right.
But when you talk about, so it says 36 months from the date of publication to comply with the standard. So 4 years from now, let's just say we expand and we're trying to we're building another greenhouse and we want it to be organic. So obviously that soil that we're starting with is 0 years old.
Yeah.
That's just fine. It's about, when you go into that, are you gonna retain that soil into year 2, year 3, year 4? You can always start from, it's about once you start a soil, it has to have a life.
Yeah.
Right? There's a period to it now. There's at least 36 months of production with that soil.
Yeah, I think the reality is that any greenhouse operation, like we watch our expenses as tight as possible. That's just the reality. If we can run our soil for 15 years, we run our soil for 15 years.
Yeah.
But there becomes an XY, axis where the yield drops to a point where there's no profitability. So at some point in time, we have to, the soil just breaks down.
And that's where they're talking about building those soil fractions and so forth. Like when I said earlier, don't just stop at 2% mineral fraction or something like that.
Yeah.
You're adding in more components into that soil. You may have to make some adjustments on what your soil mix is. And that's part of this 3 years. Is not only just taking your existing soil mix and seeing how can we supplement it and keep it alive for 3 years, but maybe trialing some different variations on that mix as well, different formulations to that soil mix to say this might produce or maintain better over that 3-year period and hold these nutrients. What's going to provide us more from the soil? Because that, again, go back to that goal of the standard, that the soil is your primary source of nutrient and that the reliance on permitted substances is to supplement what the soil cannot, not to be or replace what the soil should do, right? Otherwise, soil is just a growth medium. You might as well be growing it in rocks, right? You want to have bulk of your nutrients coming through that soil system.
We've got a couple of comments, questions in the chat here. We've got Peter from Upland Agriculture mentioned when we were asked to contribute the 2009 core for greenhouse production, we put in minimal soil volume, 2% mineral and 10% compost to keep producers from doing liquid organics only and potentially cheating with spiked inputs. I think it was a comment, but I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Like if your default is to replace all the soil every year, then you have extra incentive not to invest in that soil and to indeed use the cheapest, the minimum amount of mineral and the minimum amount of compost is more expensive than coir. So, and basically if you're a farm where that is your default, is replacing the soil every 3 years, you've got 3 years to come up with something, a different default, I guess. For those 3 years, you could still do, I think, I would accept like even 95% is still replacing your soil every year. And on the 5% of my beds, I'm going to have 5 different trials on how to get soil to last for more than 1 year. And then, so then by the end of the 3 years, your default should be, I keep my soil for 3 years. If there's a disease outbreak or whatever, sure, whip that out of there. And we would certainly have flexibility for that kind of thing. The intent of this is that it just shouldn't be your default to replace all of your soil every year. Make a reasonable effort to make that not your default, and I think we'll all be happy.
Exactly. So if you are disposing of the soil, if you are turning those containers right now, like Simon said, you're not gonna see the certifier step on that practice. But what they may be doing is asking you some of those uncomfortable questions about how are you pushing this forward? They're trying to get you ready for that 3 years. They're asking you, they want to see that you're thinking about this, that you're taking some steps. Because if you come up to that 3-year mark and now you have to start maintaining this living, breathing soil for 36 months, at that point, you're starting fresh. We want to see you starting to put the footwork in now, thinking about this, trialing it so that you have that. And again, the point was made that this is a costly thing. Replacing soil, if you can make it work and sustain that soil, it's just better cost for you. But it's a different soil mix in some cases. Not for everybody, but for some. Now, getting back to Peter's point on the comment too, it was a very good example. Why did we put 2% and 10% in the standard? Because the intent was being abused. And that's what happens. If you write this intent, like we saw in the biological fraction, says, we want you to include this. If people try to do the absolute bare minimum and get away with doing absolute, the most cost efficient way of doing it, you're going to see prescriptive in there. If you see the industry embrace this, we can see a move towards more broader open standards over time. It gives more room. This industry moves the organic industry as a whole moves at a very rapid pace. And we've gotten in from a small local field to farm market to a globalized system, which means we're facing pressures from around the world in other jurisdictions. We need the room to adapt. A broader standard like that gives us that room, but prescription makes sure that we meet the intent when it isn't being met. So it's up to each and every one of us to try and shoot for that intent rather than the minimum requirement.
So a couple more comments from Peter online as well. First comment you made was typically the canker, you have to replace all of the soil. It's not just localized to one area. So that would essentially be a justification for replacing all of your soil. A localized outbreak can still contaminate, much of your greenhouse soil. But then an interesting comment here as well. He mentions that they rotate their soil in and out of the greenhouse. And I'm sorry for assuming here, Peter, but it sounds like they're almost building their soil outside of the greenhouse and then rotating in and out as a production style. How would that be looked at? Because you're not really disposing of the soil.
You're not disposing of it. And I think that, and maybe Simon and I don't know where, I'd like to hear what you say in this. I'm looking at 7.5.12.1 there that we have on the screen. It says the soil shall be built, or the operator shall build permanent soils in their containers, reusing their soil for a minimum of 3 years. It doesn't say building the soil in a stockpile outside. However, in theory, I mean, that soil ends up in the containers. And I'd really actually like to talk to maybe, or actually see the notes around the working group on this. The intent was that it had to actually stay in the container or not.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, were you on that working group, Simon?
No.
Yeah.
So I don't know the reasoning, but we've already had the question, can I sterilize my soil?
Right.
And I, upon pondering, said, yes, I think you can sterilize just so long as it is re-inoculated with microbial life as it's prescribed in the standard. After that, so one potential solution to disease issue could be soil sterilization, as long as it's the same soil. And I think that could even involve removing it from the containers to sterilize it and bring it back in. But then there are also in place in situ sterilization scheme, or I'm not exactly sure how it works, but
Yeah.
Those are
I
possibilities.
would say that most likely, from a certification point of view, unless we, like, at least from my side of it, if we were looking at, if we saw a system that was maybe removing the soil within the farm, cycling it, doing some, maybe incorporating some, on a larger scale rather than trying to feed in compost in small pots and so forth, or in-ground system, in the greenhouse, if you were to take it out and do it in a kind of a bulk system and bring the soil back in, I think we would look at it from an intent point of view and saying, yes, they are actually trying to maintain and supplement this existing soil. They're not bringing in new, but we would be looking at what's happening. Is there a thing here that we're actually kind of just building new soil outside and saying it's part of the stockpile? Because again, those are where some of those, loopholes come in. People find a loophole to say, oh, well, I took all the soil out and look, here's this happy little pile right next to it. They got blended together. That's all new soil. So we'd be looking at the system a little bit, but I think that removal type system
Yeah.
on farm cycling would be acceptable unless we had some other interpretation from the SIC. I don't think we'd
Yeah.
want to write that non-compliance unless we absolutely have to.
Yeah.
That's not our goal. We don't want to write you those letters. We just do it because we have to. Our goal is to see the word organic protected at the end of the day. We're working together. You want solid organic, we want to see that word protected. That's our ultimate goal here.
Yeah.
It's not to catch the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's to protect the integrity of that word.
Catching the bad
That's
guys,
the goal.
real bad
That's the
guys.
dream, but that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a fun Friday.
So this is, where you wanted to talk.
I was just gonna touch on, we've kind of touched some of the big issues. There's a couple areas in the system plan to take a look at as well. Your organic system plan record keeping. This is the boring part nobody likes. I just want to touch on a couple of things for those who are paper wonks or whatever else. There is a clarification here in terms of the organic system plan, that if you make changes to how you're produced, what you presented to us in your system plan through the year, that there is now, they've actually enshrined the wording that you need to bring that to us as well to let us know, not just wait till the next year. So if you make a fundamental change in your organic system plan 6 months in, share that update with your certifier. Keep your certifier involved in your system as things change on the organic side. They're not just there once a year to take some paperwork, come out, inspect and take a check. They're there to support you through this organic side, and that means changes in the system plan should be evaluated as they happen, not wait till the next certification cycle. That's always been the intent, but it wasn't always happening, so they enshrined it in the wording here. They've also added some detail around lot number usage and just making sure that there's some clarity in lot codes accompanying bulk products, non-retail products as they move around. So that's traceable if you're shipping things from one unit to another or from one site to another, that it has identification of organic and non-organic, depending on your system, if you're doing both. And that lot codes trace through this thing, even if it's not going to retail, that there's a lot code assigned to it. Generally done, HACCP or food safety systems, this kind of traceability and segregation is always there, but in some operations it's not, and that's why it was enshrined here as well. Yes.
So for example, if we have the same lot code, for tomatoes, but it's specifically spelled out that this one's organic and this one's not. So that's still acceptable, but then markers on the facts.
When you say it, the lot, is that identification of organic incorporated into the structure of the lot code, or is it like, this is lot 1901 dash organic, or is it like the products listed as organic and this is 1901?
Like, so the lot code, let's say, would be ATA and the number doing a date code for both items, so both beef, but one's conventional, one's organic, and it's just specifically in the description of the item.
Oh, and the
organic.
So they would have different pallet numbers, so the traceability would be different, the PTIs would have different coding, different coding within those. But as far as the lot code, it will be the same.
Well, I'm asking because I don't know what this is.
So the question is for the online, in case they didn't hear it, was if we use the same lot code structure for organic and non-organic, but in the product descriptor on the product label or whatnot, we identify it as organic or not, is that acceptable? A lot code should be unique to a product, and a product in itself includes that production system in this case, because the organic production, those two tomatoes, while they might be the same variety of tomato, grown on the same site, structurally they are different tomatoes because they have been managed in different ways. And in having that same lot code, there is the potential for hopefully nobody in the room or online, but there is the potential for somebody to say, hey, these lot codes are the same. You know what? we'll just change that or get that organic on the description, or we forgot to put it in the descriptions at all. And all of a sudden your volume can double or triple in terms of what you're selling. The lot code that's tied to this is separate from the item description. The lot code should be unique to the organic product.
Yeah, and just for future questions, the online audience is saying they can't necessarily hear the audience, so if you can just repeat their questions.
We apologize, and we will certainly. Sometimes it's easy with a room in front of you, forget that there's other ears listening. Anything else on that one, or do we have other questions, or?
That's it.
Okay, there was,
Henry has a hand raised.
You can unmute yourself, Henry.
Yep, I have. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Henry.
Okay, I had a question since we have two different certifying bodies here. Since both are certifying through the Canadian Organic Standards, I have some questions like, so let's say Pro-Cert certifies one. It's certified through the Canadian Organic Standards. I would assume that if I'm certified through somebody else, I should be able to use it.
are you thinking of an input then, or?
Yes, an input.
Inputs are the fun one.
Yeah.
And
Because they're not certified to the
inputs aren't ever certified. We may approve them for use in the organic production system, but there is no such thing in general as an organically certified input. There might be inputs that are approved for use. Okay, in those cases, if it's gone through an official approval process through our actual full detailed review, we review inputs on every one of your files that you submit to us in terms of use. But when you submit information to us, you've collected that input, you've collected information, you've provided to us, it's unique to your file. I can't share that information with your competitor. So if you've done the legwork on it, I can't give it to your neighbor and say, that's okay to use because he's already using it. That's proprietary because you've done the work. Now we have public facing review processes as well, where the manufacturer can come to us and they can actually submit their documentation to us to be publicly approved and use a logo that says approved by Ecocert or approved by Pro-Cert or whoever, Omri or whoever else. And even in those cases, whether it's private or whether it's public, in those cases, the review is based on the information we collect and as we dig into the nature of the substance and how it's produced. And each individual ingredient, as you look through the PSL, depending on if it's a multi-ingredient product, there can be many different variations in terms of what we have to look at in terms of origin, nature of manufacturing, etc. In doing this, what we've often found, where there's differences between certifiers, is it's because the manufacturer or somebody else is providing us with conflicting information. I may have one bit of information that says it's done this way. Simon may have something that says it's done the other way, and they're both coming from legitimate sources. And we're trying to figure out, we have different stories because I may approve it or he might approve it and I may deny it or vice versa. And that's about consistency there in the data that we get most often than not. And there is a provision in those situations where there is discrepancy between the CVs in the Canada Organic Manual for us to get together. And Simon and I have done this a couple of times on inputs to say, hey, we don't agree on this. Why are you approving it and I'm not? What are you seeing? Well, I'm seeing this. Well, here's the papers they gave me. Here's the test results. Here's the process flow they've showed us. Here's the origin they showed us. And Simon shows me his as well. And, you know, we play a little show and tell and we find out, yeah, we're being played from both sides, or, you know, we just had different information. Okay. It happens. Unfortunately, that's the way it works. But there is a provision to provide to actually bring those things into consistency, but it takes us talking to each other and knowing that we have a conflicting list of inputs.
I don't quite understand why if there's an input that's approved by you guys that can't publish that and put it out there. I mean, it's just sounded being a lot more like work for us if there's, you know, we talk to a colleague who says, yeah, I'm using this product, and it's like, okay, we'll talk to the certifier, and it becomes a kind of a bit of a song and dance to be able to get that approved, or, you know, rationales given. You've already approved it for something. Why is this not just publicly available for us to be able to use? It's frustrating.
I understand completely.
Right, because it's just a lot for work. Everyone's busy, doing all lots of things to do, and you guys are kind of making us do this over again, which is just, it doesn't seem rational. In my opinion, but
It's because there is no.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is, again, reiterating why why isn't there a universal list of all the inputs that every certifier has approved for every different farmer?
Correct. We need one.
Yeah, that there isn't.
We can't compete against Americans or anybody else without having this.
Yeah, well, because there is no regulated process for certifiers to make those yes or no decisions on inputs. When we certify your tomato, there's a very clear process about what we have to do before we certify that tomato. We have to do this inspection. We have to verify all these points. We have to do a balance exercise. We've got to do an analysis on a random sample. None of that exists for inputs. For inputs, the review process, certifiers just kind of, there's a little bit in the organic manual about what you have to do. And it's different certifiers have different procedures and different levels of vigor that they undergo before they decide. And even within a certifier, we all do have these programs of input review where there are public lists. So an input maker can pay us money and apply to have us do a proper vigorous review of their input. And if they paid us to do that vigorous review, yes, we will publish that list of all the products from the companies who have been willing to submit their products to a vigorous review. And yes, everyone can see that. And for the most part, certifiers,
Those lists are very consistent.
yeah, and they accept each other's reviews when they're done officially like that. But when it's just some farmer saying, I want to use this, I don't know, thing that's being sold to me by so-and-so, and you're getting the information secondhand through the farmer, and eventually, you know, sometimes they get approved, but I don't know what the other certifier has done to approve that, and we're not allowed to accept that
You
kind
just
of.
run it through the same process that you would go through if it was brought to you by a company.
Yeah.
It's
It doesn't
a
cost
lot
money.
more time consuming.
And
And
no one's
generally,
paying
when we
for
get
it.
that information from
Yeah.
growers, it's usually we get it at the last minute is I'm about to buy it or I'm going to apply it. They may have even had, in a lot of cases, we have these calls. This is more common than not. I hate to say it, and I'm not saying it's anybody in the room. I'm just saying in general, we get these calls when it's last minute and, oh, by the way, I've got this input, I forgot to add it, or I just came across this and I want to use it. And I got a truck coming in a day with this stuff already. I already ordered it and I need a review.
Yeah.
That detailed process usually takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days because we go a lot deeper on it. In terms
Yeah,
of
we
that
would
process,
love-
because
we
we're
would love to
also,
do that.
remember, in that case, we are marketing it, we're giving them the right to market it as approved for organic use broadly to the public in general, at retail, everything else. And they are using our seal as an approved, as a certifier saying it is approved for use. And that's the same seal and it's the same name that's attached to your organic product. So we can't screw up on that process and damage that seal because it affects everybody who uses that seal. So it is a different level of work. Usually we have to be a little bit more responsive. The other thing that happens here, and there was a comment I heard online too about this list being Canada, United States, wherever. We have different standards in different countries. The permitted substances are specific to the standard of the country. Equivalency arrangements between Canada and the US apply to organic products, not to the inputs that are used to produce those products, okay? So equivalency and recognition for cross-border trade has absolutely zero bearing on input use whatsoever, okay, in terms of being approved for use in Canada or the US. So only those products that meet the Canadian standard can be used in Canada. Only those products that meet the US standard can be used in the US, okay? So that one we can never fix. Now, the US has also done something a little differently. Pardon me?
I should have clarified. This is approved on the approved input lists from the certifier. This isn't just a single unit.
Yeah.
This is actually on the Pro-Cert's website.
Okay.
Yes, this is approved, but yet other certifiers won't allow you to use it.
They may not have the information, and that's actually where I was going to go next here with this. The question is why would there be something that's actually on that higher level approval list that may not be accepted by other certifiers? And there's some work actually going on as well to reinforce this right now. The CFI is giving us some directive to actually reinstate that the CB shall accept these other certifiers' reviews at that level on a basis that we have ISO 17065 accreditation for that process. That means that we have a diligence level established for that process. Not every review process has that. Okay, now in saying that, There's also another provision in Canada that's very unique in that the CFI made the certifiers accountable for any outside decision, or liable, actually, not accountable, liable.
Legally liable.
Legally liable for any outside decision that we choose to accept with respect to input. So if I choose to accept Simon's privately reviewed inputs, if you use it and it turns out to be not compliant, so you take a big loss, have to go into transition for 3 years because we found out later on that it had something that nobody knew about in it, you don't only hold Simon responsible, but because I accepted it, you can hold Pro-Cert responsible as well. And then we're legally responsible for that. So we're taking on the burden of a system that we haven't seen from one of our fellow certifiers. And generally we recognize their work at the organic level because we're audited there. We aren't audited on the input review process. So it's a liability issue, it's a cost issue in terms of that as well for us to say, can we protect the integrity of that seal?
Right, whereas for a certified organic input, we don't have that liability.
No.
That if you're a food processor and you buy, I don't know, sugar that's certified by the other certifier, that's all we need to check, is that it's certified, because that's certified through the whole regulatory system.
Yeah.
But yeah, inputs is a whole different story.
No, this isn't a new discussion either.
Yeah.
I think any of you
Been
who've
going
been
on
around
since
the
the
industry,
beginning of-
I sat in meetings at Guelph, at the Guelph Organic Conference 10, 15 years ago about this exact same thing. And there's been many attempts to try and put together a universal list, but there's always an issue of being able to have consistent information, et cetera, and who hosts it and where it goes and where does it live. There's a lot of logistics around that part of it too that have created a barrier over the years. Believe me, Simon, that from our point of view, we would love to have a single point list just as much as you do. This is one of the most time consuming areas we spend our time on in the industry at the production level is input review. So if we could easily accept those, we would.
And
It's
there,
just the situation we're in right now that we're still trying to work towards a solution at the same time you are. So keep bringing this up. Keep telling OCO, keep telling CODA, keep telling OFC, anybody who's in that regulatory, because it feeds up to the government. All that feeds up through the provincial and the federal governments to say we need this and we need support for this so that we can bring a solution to you.
and if we're hesitant, it's for good reason. There is input fraud is, I hate to say it, rampant in the organic. There are lots of unscrupulous fertilizer vendors who will say whatever they need to say to get an organic approval on their fertilizer or their
You are the
pesticide.
new target market
Yeah,
because
you'll pay more.
realistically, the conventional industry is well developed and it's a mature market. The organic marketplace is just becoming something that's on their radar.
Yeah,
And we're seeing new manufacturers or existing manufacturers enter the organic space on the daily by the hundreds.
yeah.
Okay,
and
because they discounted the organic industry in the past. These are just those weird hippies out in the boonies who, had bad hair and weedy fields, right? That's what we were to them in the past. But now when Canada's a $8.9 billion industry, when the US is like $78 billion in production, now you're an income source.
Yeah.
And for, there's legitimate operations out there and there's some very, very legitimate inputs out there that are fantastic to use. But there is also, when there's opportunity, there's also opportunity for fraud. And we spend an inordinate amount of time looking at inputs that have been illegally supplemented with things that are not declared on the labels, but are actually testable. Simon knows this from great depth. He's implemented a significant testing program and certain inputs that really opened up the eyes to a lot of things that were happening in certain sectors. And we see this across the industry. You guys are the target market right now. That's why we have to do our diligence. We want to find a better solution, but it's not an easy one. It's not going to be an overnight one.
One of the things I want to add to the conversation too, and we do certifier roundtables every 3 months, and we invite certifiers from across Canada, and there's a lot of them. These are, two of the well-known ones, but there are a lot of certifiers doing different things. And even in our last meeting, we recognized that what is approved actually has different even approval titles between certifiers as well in terms of some of the names that are given that. But the idea behind making organic easy, this is an exact example of where it's not easy and it is frustrating. And so bringing your voices to your, and because everybody's online as well, to your provincial representatives as well as those federal representatives, and then allowing us to problem solve it and bring it to a place where it can also be regulated, but also it's just that it needs to be more of a discussion as well, and it is a problem, and I think you know, you can hear it through multiple people, and so it's a place for improvement, but we got owls, we got sheep.
Very organic.
Very organic room. But yes, if you are having those issues, sending us emails and then us forwarding that and saying this is a real problem and people are discussing it, that's a great way to push things to move forward when we do have complications like this.
Now, remember too, when we talk about inputs, and let's recognize that they are an essential part of every production system. But again, take the time to look through those sections of the standard on crops and soils and so forth as well, because you will often find that the use of inputs is always when all these other factors have proven to be insufficient or some similar wording to that, then inputs from PSL 32.311 may be used. They're always supposed to be the end result, the last resort, not the first. It's not where you start, it's where you end, right? When you use this system and this standard that says this is how we do it, if all that doesn't work and you still need to supplement your nutrients or you still need to treat for an insect or something else, then you go to 32.311 and find something to use. It's not the first, it's the last, okay? And what, you know, if we become a first use type situation, we're really just conventional farming with other inputs, different catalog. We're about that's this whole thing about the living soil, building a soil that supplies the nutrients primarily and not as a sideline. It's about having a system that mimics nature. So the inputs, the permitted substances should be a tool that's used as a last ditch effort. That's not always the case, and we're not going to cite you on that, or otherwise I have to be able to write non-compliance on that. However, it's part of that bigger picture that we're talking about.
We have another question online. Peter's been pretty patient. Peter, if you could unmute yourself if your question's still relevant.
Sure, yeah, I'm enjoying the discussion. My name is Peter Doig. I'm a professional agrologist calling in from British Columbia. Yeah, I've been working in intensive organic greenhouse production for over 20 years. I make fertilizers and pesticides, antimal parasites, all these types using certified organic inputs. So that's my kind of first comment and background. I was interested earlier on when there was a brief discussion on 20% water soluble inputs allowed. Now, I assume the group is talking about, and again, I've seen a lot over the last 20, 25 years. So I do compost engineering, like I said, make fertilizer, etc. I've seen a lot of products come and go. I've seen a lot of products spiked with potassium nitrate and calcium nitrate. So when we talk about water soluble, I'm assuming you're talking about things like enzyme hydrolysates, fish emulsion. I assume we're not talking about up to 20% allowable, say Chilean nitrate, for example. So could you just clarify that? So, and again, it's fairly dangerous when you do allow, put a number on the water soluble. That's when people can cheat. They can spike their fulvic acid or humic acid water with nitrate. That's my comment, but also my question.
Right. The specific question, does the 20% soluble, only applies to things that are on the permitted substances list. It doesn't override.
Right, non-synthetics.
Yeah. So
good.
But there are several things on the permitted substances list that contain soluble nitrogen and phosphorus. The protein hydrolysates is my little pet subject. But because they're not all what they say they are. But where I'm always on top of the spiking issue, and in fact, one of the most susceptible types of fertilizers to spiking are the seaweed extracts. And so I proposed, and we were implemented limits on nitrogen and phosphate in seaweed extracts. I can sort of see your point that that might send the signal if you're an unscrupulous seaweed maker that, oh, now I haven't been spiking my seaweed with phosphorus, but now that I see I can have up to 0.5%, oh, I'm gonna spike up to 0.49. But I'll certainly be on top of that. And yeah, the seaweed fertilizers are very commonly acid. They're treated with acids, usually phosphoric and nitric to boost NP. So we've got internal guidelines that are more strict than what's in the Canadian standard about what we will approve as Ecocert for a seaweed extract. Humic acids as well. Humic acid products should have no NPK in them. We've got, just to give you a little insight into our input approval program, we have a whole table of here are the standard expected NPK values of all these different ingredients. And then when you apply to have your input approved, you give us the list of ingredients. We know the NPK of each of those ingredients, or we look at your tech sheets for each ingredient. It goes into a little calculator, and they say we've mixed them at these proportions. So your final product should have an NPK of this. And if your label is claiming double that, we say, well, look, the ingredients that you've declared could not possibly produce the NPK on your final label, and we won't approve your product. So,
Okay.
Yeah, I will certainly be on the lookout for inputs that are spiked with soluble N and P just up to the amount that they allow in the new standard.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Phosphoric acid is you can use that on fish hydrolysate.
Yeah.
Okay. On fish emulsion. I just hear you say nitric acid. I've never heard of nitric acid being allowed input.
It's not allowed, no. But
shouldn't be.
But no. Seaweed acid, well, actually, in Europe, the seaweed standard is vague enough that most manufacturers have been getting seaweed extracts approved that have been stabilized with phosphoric or nitric acids, because it's vague in Europe. So yeah, in Europe,
okay, but not here. You can't use.
But not here.
No, you can't use nitric acid. Okay, good.
No,
thank you.
But it doesn't mean that somebody wouldn't try to spike the product for a better end value or better value for.
They do.
And that's what happens. And that's why it also gets mentioned. These are the type of things that we see in the input industry regularly, even if it's not a permitted input or a permitted ingredient to this.
Yeah.
They will try to use this. This is, for example, if somebody were dealing with international trade, phosphonic acid is an issue for us right now. Phosphonic. And one of the reasons they look at it is they're concerned that there's been artificial spiking in fish fertilizers, because on a smaller horticultural scale in Europe, they've experienced this, that they're bulking it up with
extra phosphoric acid.
Yes, yeah, but on the basis of buffering or balancing the pH.
Right.
And so they're hitting the phosphoric acid, and it's translating into the soil.
Okay.
And so that's what they think is happening with Canadian product. That's why we spend an inordinate amount of time checking every bulk grain shipment that goes to Europe now, because it tests as high in phosphoric acid, and it's about input use and input spiking.
Okay.
Long story short, it's a little convoluted.
Another question.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Just one more follow up on this, which I may have just lost. I was going to say comment. Ultimately, when people are using liquid organic fertilizer, ultimately the only thing you can do is test the A or B tank at the facility itself, or test the feed tank. And if there's nitrate in it, then there's an issue. That said, you can't just walk into somebody's greenhouse irrigation room and pull a sample. But
wow,
that's my
as
comment.
Fire, we can do that.
Yeah, to greenhouse level, we can. And as well, for those manufacturers who are using higher level nitrogen claims on their liquid fertilizers as well, to get that public approval process, there are requirements that we actually don't do this just as a paper review, but we actually have to go on site and we actually have to verify that there isn't supplemental nitrogen coming from outside sources. We do inspections on site, testing on site for those liquid nitrogen based fertilizers that have a higher percentage nitrogen content. So there are some requirements there as well for the same reason, but at the production level, yes, we might approve it in principle and say this meets the standard. Doesn't mean that when we come out for inspection in a month or two or whatever, that we won't be pulling a sample from that tank just to verify that. We might do that with any input, to be perfectly honest, to verify that what we saw is what's actually going on. We do it most oftentimes because analysis is expensive and that analysis bill comes back to you. That's why we don't test every field or every commodity. We do it when we see indicators that what we're seeing presented to us and what we're seeing in the field are not matching up. And then we start getting into testing to verify those findings. So we use that tool judiciously to validate what we think we see.
Thanks for the questions, Peter. If you have any follow-ups, then feel free to follow up with the certifying bodies directly as well afterwards.
Thanks.
Another question online from Antonio. What does 20% soluble ingredients include soil amendments added in bulk solid from the soil? As an example, langbeinite is typically applied in dry form, but is a soluble material. So essentially, if you're top dressing your soil with a soluble fertilizer, is that considered part of your soluble fraction?
I will answer first that this restriction only applies to nitrogen and phosphorus. And langbeinite's not a source of nitrogen or phosphorus, and so it doesn't matter if it's not. And secondly, I would disagree that langbeinite is soluble. I mean, everything has a solubility to it, and the solubility of langbeinite is quite low until they turn it into an extract using potassium hydroxide, and those extracts are a source of potassium, but not a source of N or phosphorus, and so they would not be affected. There would be no limits on how much of that you could use with respect to the soluble nutrients.
To the same point, there's like every top dress fertilizer we use has a soluble portion.
Yeah.
That is not intended to go against the 20% use.
That's correct. And then there's even an exception for compost teas and manure, liquid manure is specifically exempted from those requests. So we don't have to include those in the calculation at all.
So the question was, even the top dress, you want to repeat the question for?
Oh,
it was even the.
Any ingredient that we use.
Right.
Yeah, every ingredient has some soluble component, so does that contribute to the 20%? And so that was the question you were answering.
Yeah, so I would, no, it would, in general, no, it would not be included unless it's what you're top dressing with is a highly soluble powder, like I don't know, hydrolyzed protein or some, then maybe, but in most cases, no, it wouldn't count. Top dressed stuff would not count.
We should be clear on this too, is it is a new part of the standard. There is a new calculation. There's going to be some exploration here. Again, communication with your certifier when these issues come up, having a discussion and both ways to look at what we're looking at from a certification point of view and what you're looking at from a production point of view is going to happen. There will be no word of lie. There's going to be, I guarantee, some interpretations through the Standards Interpretation Committee published as well that'll change how we act in the next 5 to 7 years on this. This is a continuing evolution. That's what the Standards Interpretation Committee is for, is when it comes up against something that wasn't considered in the writing of the standard. So yeah, we can't say that this is exactly 100% the way it's going to be with no change for the next 5 to 7 years. We can say that this is a new change in the standard, that this is how we're seeing this right now. And we're going to continue to work with our growers to make sure that they remain compliant with this, but that understanding of what that means may evolve, and we'll try again, continue in bringing that understanding forward to you as this does come out. So keep an eye out for things like changes to the SIC question and so forth. Those are always important as well. They're not just the standards, they interpret the standard.
I just want to, we only have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to get a couple slides left of, like a few of the definitions changed, like the definition of processed manure that addressed another sort of fraud type issue with inputs that were proposed as manure extracts. And in one case, this input was described to us as an extract from manure. And then when we finally actually saw it, it was bright purple crystals and red crystals and green crystals, and it was clearly entirely synthetic. But now it clarifies that. Now we have the limits on total nitrogen and phosphorus in aquatic plant extracts because they're susceptible to spiking. A lot of the market gardeners were hoping to get paper pot transplanters added, but we didn't get over that hurdle. They still won't be allowed because of the glues.
Well, they're technically allowed, but they have to be removed.
Right, yes,
So
yeah.
they don't really serve their function then in that
Yeah.
case.
So this was my proposal to the standard that was accepted. One of them was the elimination of the amino acids listing and its replacement with 2 listings, hydrolyzed proteins of plant origin and hydrolyzed proteins of animal origin. This mimics the way that it's listed in the European regulation. And I've separated this out because after 3 years of study, discovered that most of the hydrolyzed protein products that claim to be made from soybeans are in fact made out of animal waste from Asia. And we worked with the University of Victoria proteomics analysis laboratory to finally get very definitive results saying, oh, this is bovine collagen. It says 100% soy. And they submitted to all the certifiers the manufacturing process of soybeans and natural enzyme. And that's how we get this product. And it was slaughterhouse waste in one case, spiked with chromium, I mean, not intentionally spiked, but which we assume was because it was leather tanning waste that was used to make this soluble nitrogen fertilizer. So this is why I'm skeptical and hesitant to approve inputs in some cases.
Just a question, going back on that, you're not reducing it though completely, like something in the past where you've got an 1800 or 1600 aren't allowed, but your 1511 will be fine. So
if it meets the other restrictions, yeah, like, so yes.
So what's the hard restriction cut off then? I know there's a reduction, but I know you're still allowed to use it to some degree.
Right, so, well, yeah, there is, you want to look
I
up?
have it here.
I think it is 15 for animal and 14 for plant.
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat the question? For
Yeah, so the question is, what is so now that we're classifying hydrolyzed proteins by plant and animal, and we put a limit on total nitrogen, what are those limits?
It says, for hydrolyzed proteins of plant origin shall not contain more than 15% nitrogen on a dry basis. At least 90% of the total nitrogen shall be organic protein nitrogen. Isolated amino acids such as glycine, lysine, and methionine are prohibited. Then hydrolyzed proteins of animal origin shall not contain more than 17% nitrogen on a dry basis. And again, the 90% requirement is there as well.
So it was 16 and 17?
It was 15 and 17
for plant and 17 for animal. And those are generously high, I think. Like the normal calculation for protein is 16%. So the assumption is that pure protein should be 16% nitrogen. We've even allowed up to 17% in the case of animal. If it's 18, you know it's not protein, it's something else like an isolated amino acid or a synthetic nitrogen.
And knowing now, as Simon's demonstrated, there's much fraud in this particular category of input. They're not the ones that fly through review very quickly. We often look a lot deeper and we start looking at potential for testing and so forth, because this is a category where there has been excessive amount of fraud in the past. So any new product that's coming to market in that category, we're going to look very deeply at to see if it actually does fit into that legitimate category.
Yeah. So there are a lot of synthetic amino acids out there. So like glycine is the most widely produced amino acid in the world. And it's produced in such large quantities because it's the primary ingredient in glyphosate. So it's a manufacturing feedstock for herbicide is an amino acid called glycine. And that one is 18.8% nitrogen. But it's derived purely from chemical feedstocks. It has no animal or vegetable origin at all. So in the micronutrients, there's some changing to the wording, and we've now added cobalt. Previously, cobalt was missing from the list of micronutrients. And so that should help that should be of interest to greenhouses. Molybdenum, I think we've clarified. And so we've eliminated the general listing for micronutrients. and then listed each allowable micronutrient now with its own, with the forms that are allowed.
So if it isn't in the standard now, it can't be plugged under a general micronutrient flooding anymore. It has to be specifically listed by the substance now.
Because yes, so there was a lot of debate before, is this element actually a micronutrient? And one of the part of that debate was around silicon, and the working group could not come to a consensus that silicon was an essential plant nutrient, but they nonetheless, since it was already allowed for pest control, there's now broader acceptance of liquid silicon fertilizers. Vinasse or condensed molasses solubles so we changed the wording on that. Those were also high risk. Chitosan is added. That might be of interest. That's a common soluble. It's not, there is some nitrogen in it, but it's not, it's more of a, what would you call it? A biological stimulant than a fertilizer. And I know we've all been using coconut coir in our systems for a long time, but it's never been specifically listed. It's always been just kind of under plant byproduct, I guess, and there was some confusion about that. So now it has its own separate listing. Insect frass is now listed in addition to worm castings. Ozonated water is now an allowed crop protection product. And yeah, plants. So in the process of adding coconut coir, we've limited what can be approved as just a plant material now to only very minimally processed plant materials could be approved under that category. Yeah, the new allowing for seed lubricants. Struvite might be of interest to greenhouse producers, especially if you're looking at making a soil mix that provides phosphorus from the soil. It's a moderately soluble phosphorus source. And so we could actually, that'll be maybe a sick question, I'm sure. Yeah. Does struvite count as soluble? I would say no, because it wouldn't be, you couldn't feed it through the liquid. Maybe if it went through your bioreactor, yes, but
that's for the process delivery at that point.
Yeah. So, but struvite would make an excellent, I think, addition to a potting mix as a source of a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus. There's a few changes to food additives. That's not particularly relevant here. But I just wanted to, I know we've only got 1 minute, very quickly talk about where this came from. I mean, maybe even just do this one. Like, how did we get here? Organic certification, the whole organic certification movement, I think, can be traced back to 1928, the publication of the Demeter Standard for Biodynamic Farming, which was based on Rudolf Steiner's course in agriculture that he wrote in, I think, 26. And it is a philosophy. It's not a science textbook, it's a philosophy. And as an example, you must know that the cosmic influences that come to the expression of a plant come from the interior of the earth and are led upwards. Thus, if a plant, especially rich in these cosmic influences, is eaten by an animal, the manure that animal's digestive system provides as a result of consuming such fodder will be just the right thing for the soil where that plant grows. So this is kind of laid the philosophical groundwork for organic certification movements. Then in 1967, the Soil Association became the first, other than Demeter, the first modern organic standard, soil right in the name. In 1980, IFOAM came about, International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. 1990, the Food Productions Act came in, and just to get the specifics of where some of this came from, and to see how far things have gone in Europe. In Europe, the new regulation has gone hardcore, not only against hydroponics, but even container production is no longer allowed in Europe. And as organic plant production is based on nourishing the plants primarily through the soil ecosystem, plants should be produced on and in living soil in connection with the subsoil and bedrock. Consequently, hydroponic production should not be allowed. nor growing plants in containers, bags, or beds where the roots are not in contact with the living soil. So when the technical committee was evaluating proposals to the Canadian standard, we did this in the context of a global organic movement. And I think their intent was to sort of strike a balance between Europe and the more permissive stance of the US, especially given that, I'll go in here, the 20% rule came from the US, came from the National Organic Standards Board. They proposed back in 2022 that soluble nitrogen fertilizers with a carbon nitrogen ratio of less than 3:1 shall be limited to 20% of crop needs. And so the 20% number came from this, and they have a whole great big paper that I can give you access to where they justified their 20%, how they came upon the 20% number. Yeah, and that's it.
Thanks for the context, Simon. I think one thing to recognize here is Europe is doing a lot. They're kind of on the more conservative side of organic production. I know there's a lot of concern with a lot of our members because our main export market, especially for the greenhouse industry, is the US, right? So we are, yeah, I should say that we are advocating to best align with the US practices as well. They are undergoing their review of the equivalency arrangement with Canada and US. I'm sure you guys are aware. So hopefully with this new standard, we'll see some better alignment with the US, whether that's theirs to ours or ours to theirs, and we can have a more even playing field when we're exporting or importing produce from the United States. And I know we do have some representatives from CODA, from the Canadian Organic Trade Association, so I'm sure they are doing lots of work to ensure that our markets are equivalent. So yeah, I do want to encourage, Simon and Byron were here. I appreciate their time. They didn't have to do something like this, so I like that you guys were willing to come out and talk to many of our members and greenhouse growers from across Canada online. And your willingness to work with individual growers as well. That's very appreciated. And I'm sure they're willing, if you have any follow-up questions, specifically with the new standards or implementation timelines, anything like that, then Byron's left his card, Erica's left her card, and Simon has the contact details that I'm sure I can share with the members as well, with our attendees. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the certification body. They're willing to work with you and talk you through your certification. Like was mentioned, they're not here to penalize you. They want to work with you. So hopefully we can continue that relationship. And yeah, thank you all for joining. Thank you for joining online as well. I hope this was helpful. We could probably spend hours talking about this subject, so we have to limit it to 2 hours. But thank you again for joining. And yeah, thank you. Thank you. So just a reminder, the session was recorded. So if you want to go back and look at something that you may have missed today, or if any of your colleagues weren't able to make it today, we'll be sending this out and posting this online through the Ontario Organic YouTube page. So it will be accessible. So feel free to contact me or Erica or anyone here to access the details to access the recording.
And I would like to get a picture with everybody before you all run away.